Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Zach Ackerman, Denison's Director of Business Development. It's with a lot of joy that I get to welcome you from around the world to Denison's first installment of our Resilience webinar series. To start, why doesn't everyone test out the functionality of the Q&A, the questions and answers feature on this webinar, by sharing where in the world you're joining us from? And for context, in the coming weeks and months, we'll be delivering a number of webinars and articles that aim to help you understand what has happened through the disruption in the wake of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Today's webinar will introduce our findings overall and preview some of the most important learnings from the nearly 40 clients who have leveraged our pro bono resilience assessment and consulting support. I want to introduce our hosts first and foremost. Joining us today are Dan and Michael. Dr. Daniel Dennison is the chairman and founding partner of Denison Consulting. His decades-long career as a researcher and professor, first at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, and then at the International Institute for Management Development in Switzerland, has produced some of the most impactful work in the fields of organizational culture and leadership behavior. Today, he plays an active role in our firm and driving our research and our consulting practice into the future. Michael Schwendemann is Denison's Director of Research Development. Michael joined Denison after working at Ford Motor Company on their talent analytics team. And his team here at Denison produces an immense amount of academic style research, manages our product development and benchmarking, and provides best-in-class data analytics for our clients. While Dan and Michael present today, please do utilize the Q&A function and please ask your questions throughout the presentation. I'll be monitoring those questions and comments throughout and gathering the key themes, and we've dedicated a really good amount of time at the end to answer all of your questions. So please leverage this opportunity for dialogue. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Michael to get us started.
That's great, Zach. Thank you, Zach, for getting us organized and for giving us the opportunity to talk about the work that we've been doing. We're very delighted to have you join us today, wherever you are in the world, because we've been doing a lot of research on how organizations are responding to the pandemic and how the people in those organizations are responding to that, trying to learn. What can we best do to work our way through this? What are some of the key lessons and key challenges? Many of you are familiar with our work or worked with us in the past, but some of you I know are not. So I just want to start with a little brief overview of kind of who we are and what we do. You know, we're a firm that is focused on large-scale culture transformation and leadership development in very global firm, office in the US, office in Switzerland, and quite a global business that reflects the work that we've been doing all over the world for lots of years. You know, our purpose, you know, is to improve organizations by developing their corporate culture and leadership. And that's a pretty distinctive approach to changing and improving organizations, and especially today. What's that mean in that context? You know, we've worked with lots of clients over the years, lots of good experience. We do research on how organizations work their way through culture change from all around the world. But then a pandemic hits. What happens next? And with us, as we decided, like many of you, middle of March, one day we're sitting in a town hall meeting, and I think to myself, should we be here in the middle of March? And raise that question to the team, and we scratch our heads, and the next day we decide, no, we're going home. We're going to work from home. And the first week, it's like, oh my God, how's this going to work? The second week, it's like, this works pretty good. It's a new challenge. It's a new era. Things are changing quickly. What should our priorities be? And how are we going to get organized so that we're able to thrive in a very, very difficult time? One of the things that we decided is that we should focus on the pandemic, and we should focus on the responses of organizations to that. And so what we did was we kind of quickly thought through some of the key issues, the content. Our CEO, Brian Edkins, helped us a lot with sorting this out so that we developed a set of questions on communication, technology, well-being, customers, and maintaining the connection. And then we offered that to all of our clients, and we've now done resilience studies with over 40 companies from around the world. That's today, maybe it's actually 45. We've done these pro bono to help. And we've got our first round of results now that are from 23 organizations, about 4,000 people. And so we want to give an overview of this. This is the first overview that we've given. The paper that we've sent around and we'll send around to everyone after this, kind of summarizes the first set of results, but then we also, have 4 or 5 other projects underway where we're looking at other specific aspects of this, and we'll be distributing that, and we'll be doing a webinar series to bring those results to you. And this effort also continues. We are still, taking on new projects with client organizations, and we're glad to do what we can do to help you out. Our regular culture transformation activity continues with a lot of dynamic, fast opening things. Some things inevitably pushed back. But this area of our work is especially important. We hope it's useful to you, and today we want to give a little bit of an overview of that. Here's the questions that we asked, and the most important thing here that sticks out is, wow, these are very positive. This set of items is just recently benchmarked. We've just developed that with the first 30 organizations or so. We believe it's the first benchmarked resilience assessment that exists. But here we want to just summarize the first round of findings. Because the first thing that sticks out, as I said, is these are very, very positive. Items like understanding policies and practices, tools and technologies, goals and priorities, and the belief that the organizations adapting effectively are all 90% favorable response or high 80s. But there is quite some range here. People do feel the organization's taking care of me. That's extremely important. But the things that do stand out here is that the issue of people feeling they're being heard by leadership in their organization. That's the lowest question. The next lowest one is we're coordinating effectively across different parts of the organization. So the picture we get, which I think is an important one to understand, is that these are organizations that moved fast, responded fast, and they were able to do things with kind of top-down leadership, conviction of the right thing to do, be clear to everyone, and that's very positive, very important. Every organization doesn't do that for sure. We've got some examples of that too. But the issue of continuing to hear the voice of your people, that's harder. Listening and understanding and responding are quite a bit bigger of a challenge, especially on an ongoing basis, than is creating the policies and practices, the tools and technologies. Organizations moved quickly on this. The other item that stands out is coordination. One of the most striking demands for me as I see organizations reacting to this, is that we all need to rebuild the coordination system that we have across the organization. Governance, as one executive joked, just became a big pile of Zoom invites. Okay, because that's how we communicate, that's how we connect, that's how we decide, that's how we filter information, and nothing happens informally by the water cooler or on the way in from the parking lot or at the lunchroom on an informal basis. We need to be more mindful, more explicit about how we communicate and coordinate, because you always need to know what you don't know. That just got a lot harder. When things aren't on the radar screen, how do we interact so that we pick those back up and we use that to establish the coordination that we need to operate as an organization? So there are some real clear insights that come from this quickly. And, we see people are rising to the challenge, especially at the early stage. Top-down actions, working pretty well. Policies, tools, goals, priorities. People feel their organizations are taking care of them and that their companies are responding effectively overall. And so these are great examples. We're very proud of many of the things that organizations have done. And the challenges, though, are ensuring that people feel their voices are being heard. And doing that on an ongoing basis. I don't need to tell any of you how dynamic this is and how this changes day to day, if not hour to hour. And so keeping continuously in touch so that we hear the voices, people feel heard, and that we can use that to establish new ways to coordinate work when everyone can't work face to face. Focus on the customer also needs some attention. This varies quite a bit. In some organizations, they had very strong scores on this. They have established in the kind of virtual world a high quality way of keeping in touch with customers. Others are on the other end of the scale, and we see them struggling for how they pay attention to their customers in this setting. But everything seems to resolve around taking care of people. If you look at, in the crunch the numbers, look at what connects to what, you find that the two most closely associated questions in this set here are the 5 and 6. My organization is taking care of me. My voice is being heard by the leadership in my organization. But taking care of people is very highly rated. Hearing their voice on an ongoing basis is the lowest item. So that's one of the key insights that we take from this. And we begin to dig into this. And we say, well, why are these scores so high? Is everyone just rising to the challenge and everyone's doing a great job? So what we did is we looked at the subset of companies that took our resilience survey and also where we had culture data on them on our culture model, and said, what kind of cultures do these organizations have that are doing the resilience assessment? They've made a choice to do this. Some we reached out, offered to help. They said, oh my God, we're too busy to even think about it. And I can respect that and appreciate that. There's a lot going on, no question about that. But of the ones that said, yes, that's attractive, here's what their culture scores look like. For those of you not familiar with our model, it's a benchmark score. It's a percentile score. So the numbers on this chart are the percentile that comes from an organization's responses being compared to a global benchmark of about 1,000 companies that we maintain and update. And this shows that they're very strong. If the resilience sample was average in terms of our overall culture practice, all these scores would be 50th percentile. They're not. These are organizations that had really strong goals, objectives, a vision, dynamic, creating change, in agreement. Um, Surprisingly, the lowest culture score for this sample of organization was core values, um, which, very important in this point in time. But it seems, that organizations that were led to use the resilience assessment um, weren't primarily driven by a strong sense of core values, although it's, that plays a very important point. There were organizations that had strong sense of direction. They were dynamic, they were agile, they were changing. They had a high level of agreement, they had good coordination, and they worked well as a team. That's what distinguishes this sample of organizations, because of course the organizations choose. We haven't done, we'd love to do a, kind of more of a random sample so that we got some idea of, what a typical organization was doing, but that's kind of wishful thinking in this environment. So as we looked into this a little closer, one of the things we found is that resilient organizations have very adaptable cultures. Resilience in the COVID pandemic is really a reflection of an underlying agility. So the organizations that had the top 3 resilience scores, as you can see in the upper right here, they also had extremely high adaptability scores. How about the ones that scored the lowest on our resilience assessment? That's the ones with the red circle down there, lower left. They had low adaptability, and they also had some of the lowest resilience scores. And it's interesting because we also had 2 kind of outliers that are over here on the far left that actually had very low adaptability scores. These were, as you might suspect, pretty bureaucratic, traditional organizations, not real responsive to customers or their people. But they took action quickly, and they had generally, pretty high scores on the resilience assessment, even though their adaptability was very low. Okay, so that's the picture that we take away from this, is that resilience is a reflection of the underlying culture. It's also an expression of the underlying culture. One of the discussions that we see a lot of our clients involved in is how do we reflect what we want to be in the future in this current environment? Because, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Well, today's that step, and never waste a good crisis. How are we going to use this crisis to emphasize what's most important to our people, to our customers, and to our organization and its survival? It's a tall order. There's no question. Things are flying by really, really fast these days. But that's a significant part of the discussion and the debate within each organizations, is what do we want to prioritize as we start to build the future that's in quite a new and different world. So the other thing that we did in here is that we asked a couple of questions about what are some of the things the organization has done well, and what are some of the things that they could be doing better. So I want to turn things now to our Director of Research and Development, Michael Schwendeman. And Michael will take us through these findings and highlight some of the patterns that we see, and clarify some of the, the comments from each one of the organizations that help express what's under each of these categories. So over to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. So in addition to reviewing the trends of the quantitative data and seeing what that showed us, we also investigated the qualitative data here. So we analyzed the nearly 3,000 comments that came across the first 20 or so organizations for both of those open-ended items of the resilience survey. And we used a natural language processing approach to do this, which generates the themes from the bottom up based on how the words and phrases in the comments are grouping together. So the results of this analysis are shown here. First, for the item about what organizations have done well. So on this slide, you can see what those top themes that showed up. And in the next few slides, we'll expand on these themes and accompany a representative sample comment from each of the themes that we're seeing. So one of these first themes that we're seeing is really looking at the top-down transparent communication and information sharing. In this way, it's really in times of uncertainty, leadership may not be able to share clear direction about business plans, but they can share the details about what conversations are happening and what leaders are doing to address what's happening in the world, and then share any updates that will be impacting employees as soon as possible. And this is something that was really appreciated and most popular and most often appreciated amongst the leaders.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
Or, amongst the employees in the organization. So a sample comment here, they've kept lines of communication open. They kept us aware of the ever-changing situation that we are going through. They understand that this is a tough time and have worked well to adapt to it. And it's really this transparency and this communication that's been most appreciated by employees throughout this pandemic. The second theme that we see coming up here is related to employee health and safety. Many employees were responding, talking about how their organization has provided sanitizer and PPE to help put the employee health and safety first. In addition to that, employees were very appreciative of moving to remote work. When everything was breaking out and the pandemic was starting to ramp up very quickly, employees appreciated moving to home and being able to work from home to protect their own health and safety. But for those essential workers that are still in the plant, still in the offices, when organizations have provided masks, gloves, sanitizer, and altered their policies to address the health and safety of their employees, things like staggering shift times so that everyone isn't arriving at the plant at the same time, or using temperature checks, those have been appreciated by employees. A sample comment in this case, doing everything we can to stop the spread such as temperature checks and wearing masks. The third set of themes that we're seeing here is really about working from home and doing so quickly. There were a number of comments that spoke to both of these themes that are highlighted here of working from home and responding quickly, and being among the first organizations before even local governments had mandated it, allowing employees to work from home so that they can contribute and stay productive while maintaining their physical safety. Further, many organizations provided tools such as monitors and desk chairs, as well as the technology like virtual conferencing and VPN connectivity, so employees could smoothly transition to their new workplace. And there were a number of comments that spoke very highly of their IT support and their organization's leadership in making this transition as smooth as possible. One example comment here, allowing employees to work from home has been wonderful, especially for those who have children to take care of, given the lack of childcare. And then the fourth bucket of themes that we've been seeing to this first question here is really around collaborating and connecting as a virtual team. So while the regular and informal meetings of the office are no longer possible, like Dan alluded to, teams have shifted to regular check-ins between team members to share about their work and to maintain contact with each other. And this has been something that they've had to do in a more intentional way than ever, because the fact that those informal happenstance meetings aren't happening on a regular basis anymore. And the technology has enabled this connection through virtual meetings more often than not. A sample comment here, daily team meetings keep everyone engaged and have opened up opportunities for us to engage more deeply with our clients. So that increase in connection has really helped push the business forward and help this transition be as smooth as possible. So in addition to that first question, we also dug into the second question here: what can organizations do to better support you during the crisis? So here again, you see the list of themes, and this one was much more spread out and much more varied based on organizations. Within specific organizations, we saw really unique themes popping up. And when we did this analysis across the organizations, they tended to bucket into these themes that you see here. Number one is understanding and supporting work-life balance. Linked closely and to that last theme as well, prioritizing employee well-being. So if we move ahead, these are the two of the ones that were most important, and some of the things that people have been struggling with. And you see it reflects the same type of findings that we're seeing in the quantitative data. Balancing work from home is something that employees are learning how to do. And as they navigate these unprecedented circumstances, they must balance this new style of work in a remote setting with other responsibilities, whether that's raising and educating children who would typically be at school or daycare while they're at home working from their home office. They have to learn how to balance those things and have a flexible arrangement to deal with those things. Another thing that was mentioned often is turning off work so that they can recharge. When your office is just a few steps away from your kitchen or your bedroom or your living room, it's tough to be able to turn work off and recharge in those off hours. And so maintaining physical health as well as mental health is really important in this time, and something that constantly came up in the comments for these organizations. A good sample comment here: I wish the chaos of home life would be taken into consideration for allowing staff to be flexible with their work days if required to work from home. A good example of some actions organizations can take of understanding where their employees are at and offering opportunities to work, whether that's early in the morning or late at night, and only scheduling meetings during those times that their employees will consistently have free. Often that means around meal times, trying to avoid those meetings so that they can address those other needs that they have, balancing their life with their work. The second theme that popped up here was one that was really impressive and really reflective of the high quantitative scores that we were seeing. And this theme was really about pride and appreciation for the organization. So many of these comments were along the lines of, you know, what can we do better? Nothing. The support has been stellar. Just keep doing a great job. Keep doing what you've been doing. And that's been a really impressive and overwhelmingly positive response that these employees and the sample comments that are here reflect that. I honestly cannot think of anything. I think we've done a great job. I am very proud of how our organization handled COVID-19. It was overwhelmingly positive feedback, was often accompanied by employees expressing pride for their organization in a way that they've never felt before, whether it was them pivoting how they worked and starting, for example, one organization started producing hand sanitizer and being able to share that with their employees, with essential workers, as well as with the broader workforce. And then also just stepping up in many different ways, supporting their community, or just being very effective at being transparent from the top down, of caring about employees and making sure that their health and safety comes first. Overwhelmingly positive response there. The third theme that we see here is really about that connection. That's a theme that popped up in both of these questions, is about how are we connecting effectively? How are we communicating with one another? And this one was a balance between facilitating effective communication and also making sure that that communication that's there is streamlined and as effective as possible. While more irregular intentional meetings are needed to check in with teammates and supervisors, and that was among one of the top themes for the first question, many employees have voiced concerns over their schedules are filling up with these virtual meetings, leaving very little time to get the work done in between or after. And an example comment here is, how can we streamline meetings? I'm on video calls from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's a new level of exhausting. Limiting meetings and trusting our teams to execute would be very much appreciated. So it's really important, while staying in touch and making sure that regular check-ins are available, it's really important to make sure you give employees time to get their work done as they would have had in the office the same way. And then finally, one of the fourth themes that we're seeing here is really about recognizing that extra effort that employees are putting forward, whether that's through compensation, whether that's through incentivizing in different ways, or simply just recognizing the increase in stress, the increase in effort that those employees are putting forward. Many employees have expressed, this is a stressful time. We're more stressful than we typically are. And this it's not recognized through, you know, a bump in pay, which is difficult at this time, at least recognition in some way would be appreciated. Sample comment here, providing a hazard pay increase during this time would be nice. I know that this may not be possible, but there's definitely an increase in stress, and most, if not all, employees have put forth significant effort to make things work. So recognizing this in whatever way possible from a leadership standpoint within an organization is important to make sure that, you know, that extra work isn't going unnoticed or unappreciated.
Any other comments you want to make on the qualitative results, Michael, before we move on? That was great.
Yeah, no, all of them mainly fall into the bucket of, you know, support your employees, meet them where they're at, and do your best to, you know, if not provide clarity in a time where that's simply not possible, at least provide transparency in how you're dealing with it.
Great. Some of the priorities that we see, you know, based on this research, have become pretty clear, and we'd like to, you know, share those with you, and also, you know, have a discussion where we respond to questions that that you want to raise. But you know, the difference between taking care of your people and listening to them, listening's the hard part. The policies and procedures that people have taken are really important. There's no question there. But the continuing capacity to listen and to understand to the whole range of things that people encounter, you know, is a real challenge. One guy I talked to is like a corporate attorney, and who has like 2 children, and he said, yeah, you know, my workday really is centered around you know, my kids' lesson plans. And so what I need to do first in the day is get my lesson plan straight. And then I can find out where my work fits in. And it's like, wow, well, did corporate tell you to do that? No, of course not. But the things that people are learning as they learn how to not only survive, but thrive in this situation are so important to share, but they all start with listening. It's hard enough in kind of normal times, but big challenge now. And so in each of your organizations, being clear about what kind of infrastructure you've established to listen and respond is extremely important, because I think we're in this for a while, and there'll be a number of changes. And organizations that manage this effectively, it really, really makes a difference. It makes a difference in the business, and it makes a difference in how well you can care for your people. One of our colleagues, a guy named Richard Citron and Michael Couch, both, you know, accomplished authors, they said, you know, no, we're tired of listening to clients talking about bouncing back. Got to think about bouncing forward, because reinventing what's great about your organization that works in this environment for the future is a really, really important priority. And we're struggling. There's so many different things to respond to. It's really hard to remember this and to look forward and to anticipate how you're going to come out of this with an organization that's well positioned for the future, whatever that might be. And we definitely don't get it by thinking about bouncing back. We know we're bouncing, and trying to think about that so that we're bouncing forward for the future. It needs to be a high priority in all your organizations. Your governance structure, hierarchy, coordination for the digital age, you know, that's the way we used to run organizations is, you know, I'm sorry, but it's gone. We're not going back. The organizations that'll thrive in the future are the ones that create the best, organizational system, the best governance, the hierarchy, the coordination, the network. Whoever creates that works the best in the digital age, those will be the organizations that will thrive. Even in our business, we see this with all of our clients, but we see this in ours too. How do you do consulting in the digital age? How do you work with clients and help them when you never met them face to face? And we have gratefully, we have a growing part of our portfolio that's exactly that way. And what we found is that organizations that are moving fast to recreate this for the future, for a digital age, are very responsive and are looking for partners that can think in that way and can help them move it along. And the last point really is how the culture change requires both the kind of big picture purpose, our aspirations, our identity, but also it happens by hundreds of little habits that occur in an aligned way. That's how transformation occurs. We've done quite a bit of research over the past few years on habits and how habits and processes and routines, how that's really what culture looks like at the ground level. And that's where the change takes place. And I think it's pretty profound that we're in the middle of at least three big kind of institutional changes right now. How many of your habits have changed as a result of the pandemic? All the things that we do to stay safe, how restaurants operate, how we behave in public, how you interact with people, those all need to be aligned. If they are aligned, then we have a transformation. We can really mobilize large organizational systems to change rapidly. But if those habits aren't aligned, then the change doesn't occur. To me, the most chilling moment of the George Floyd tragedy was when I learned, then this is another example of institutional change and how it comes down to very micro level behaviors and habits. The most chilling moment to me was when, of many, was when I learned that one of the three officers standing behind Derek Chauvin was on his second shift. Okay. This is, in effect, it's an onboarding procedure for a young officer in the Minneapolis system. And it's not about bad apples. It's about an orchard that keeps producing those bad apples. And, the institutional change too, as we become digital organizations, all the things that we've had to kind of leave behind, all the new things that we've had to learn, all the things where we give it a try, but it actually didn't work the right way. And so you try 2 or 3 more times and we start to get it. When we align micro level behavior and action, habits and routines in an aligned way to support a change in purpose, mission, direction, objectives, that's when you see transformation in an organization. And that's another lesson that we take out of our research on how organizations are reacting to the pandemic. This overview that we've done today gives kind of a big picture of the research that we've done. But, this is also generated work in a lot of different areas. And so our webinar series and our series of publications is this is not the first, this is not the last, this is the first, but there's a series. And Michael and his team have been key in organizing all of this. And so turn things back to Michael to give us an overview of some of the coming attractions and some of the other themes that our research is focused on. So Michael, back to you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Dan. So like Dan said, this is the first and this is preliminary. There's a lot more in the works and there's a lot more on the way. And a lot of balance between looking at what are the high level trends we're seeing across organizations and what do those topics mean at the employee level and in the organization level. So we're starting with these high level themes that we've talked about today. What are we seeing with the quantitative data so far? What are we seeing with the qualitative data as well? We'll have articles following up the one that Dan and I wrote about these high level themes. What are the top themes from the resilient organizations that have done well? And what are some of the top 5 themes that employees are asking for organizations to do better? And really digging into those deeper and giving more examples of what that looks like at the organization level and the employee level. In addition to that, we'll be digging into what are some deep dive real life examples from resilient organizations. First one is about consistency. Obviously, adaptability is important. What about consistency? What role does consistency play in the midst of uncertainty during a crisis? How is having consistent communication, consistent coordination, and emphasizing core values at a time like this still important and still something that organizations need to keep in mind? Second, virtual teamwork. How are teams connecting and working effectively and collaborating effectively? How are we trying to imitate the in-person meetings, the in-person brainstorming, and the innovation that occurs in person in a virtual world, and what's needed to do that? And then finally, understanding and supporting work-life balance and employee well-being. This is one of the top themes that we've been seeing. Is this is what employees struggle with the most and need more support from their organizations for. And so we'll really be digging in and trying to give more life and flavor to what does this look like at the employee level, and what are some actions that we can take as organizations to help support those employees.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
That's what's coming up. Yeah.
All right, so stay tuned. And we're, our purpose in all of this is to learn as much as we can, as fast as we can. It's a learning race, and to share that with you, because knowledge that's useful is always what we're trying to provide, and always what we're trying to generate in collaboration with our partners and our clients. So we'll stop there for today. We'll be back, but want to take a few minutes for some discussion. We've got about a quarter to, so we've got a decent amount of time here. And I'm sure that you all have your own experience, your own questions, your own insights. So I'm glad that we've got a little bit of time here that we can talk about that and get some of your reactions. So maybe we want to turn things back to Zach and Nellie Stansberry, who's also part of the team that is hosting the webinar today. Any insights that you have or questions that you want to raise that our audience today has brought up?
Yeah, Dan, absolutely. We have a very attentive and active audience. So thank you very much for everyone's comments and questions throughout.
Great.
As I was monitoring questions, I was doing my best to answer some on the fly. A common question in terms of housekeeping was, can you have access to the slides? And by the end, I'm going to type my email into the chat. If you send me an email upon request, I'm happy to deliver the presentation. I've seen that about 10 people have already emailed me. So happy to do so. Yeah,
and we'd also add that we have a Transform paper. We publish our own series of research case studies, insights in a series we call Transform. And there's a paper version of this that summarizes a good part of what's here. And we'll make sure that everybody gets access to that as well.
Perfect. So there were 3 major themes with respect to questions. There was one about the assessment and the data itself and some clarifiers there. There was
Sure.
also a set of questions around leaders' roles and how do you develop the right leaders to fit into the, or prepare for a crisis, I should say. And then the third was around organizational items such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. How does folks who have kids at home, what other insights may we have derived from that? And things like loyalty to the organization. So I think there are a couple clarifiers on the data that might be helpful at the beginning to power.
Sure.
And then I'd love to open it up to the leadership and organizational questions, because I think that's where the real impact is.
Yeah. Great.
Could you clarify the timing of the data collection and any changes, if we noticed any, from the beginning of the crisis through now, where some states and countries are reopening?
Great, Michael.
Sure.
Do you want to
I'll
speak to
start with
that
that.
first? I can chime in. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So these preliminary findings were based really on the first group of organizations that took this survey. And the date range for that was between April 1st and May 15th. So we had about 20 to 25 organizations take the survey during that time, and these results are reflective of that. As far as how it trends, or how the results looked across those times, I would say really those organizations that took the survey first and really early in the process were those organizations that stepped up quickly and really value the employee listening aspect of how organizations work. And so we saw really high scores. Since then, we've had many more organizations come through, even since the findings that we shared today. And I would say, while the self-select bias of those organizations that jumped on the opportunity to do a survey like this led to those really high scores early on, that started to regress lower towards the mean the more organizations we get and the deeper we get into the pandemic. Dan, would you have more comments there?
Well, and also, Michael, very, very good point. Also, as we got a bigger proportion of larger organizations, when we started doing this with several organizations that had tens of thousands of people, you know, we saw quite a different pattern. And so our first shot at a benchmark was, well, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, and we started using that, presenting results, because it does help in lots of ways. But we also felt that that was a very, very high benchmark that was reflective of kind of the early first mover characteristics. And so we think that'll float downward a little bit, and that it will change. You know, I think that in our next phase, we probably do want to also pay more attention to, you know, back to work dynamics. These are initial response, and we will continue to offer that and to track this. But you know, we also this is a moving target. It changes weekly, if not monthly. Quite difficult area to do research, because the half-life of the findings is pretty short when the world's evolving at warp speed, and you know, it takes time to do research. You can get great insights from quick pulse assessments, and we do a lot of that as well. But you know, it is a moving target, and our agenda will keep changing as organizations move through this.
Excellent. Thank you both. One other about the data, this is a very international, so could you speak to the geographic diversity of the organizations we work with?
That we work with in terms of the resilience survey,
yes,
or in general?
Specifically with respect to this study.
Yeah, we have organizations that are from Asia, Latin America, Europe. You know, again, like many other things that we find, there are a lot of patterns that hold wherever you go. around the world. There's, of course, different dynamics, location to location. But we actually see a fairly similar set of patterns from even in Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Peru are countries where we've done projects, and we do see a similar pattern. China, Singapore, Malaysia. There are a lot of similarities. Again, still a small sample. Hard to do things that are representative of the world in a short period of time. And with the projects that we've done in Europe, we also see a very similar pattern.
Great. I want to now move for the.
Do you want to add anything to that, Michael?
Yeah, if I may.
Yeah, please.
I think mainly what you're seeing is the trends at the high level are very similar, but how those trends manifest is very different across different organizations and across the world. For example, we had organizations that were in Asia that a lot of the comments surrounded, transportation, getting to and from work, and how difficult that was. Not something we ran into at many other organizations, particularly US-based ones. But it's really still about looking out for prioritizing employee health and safety, and making sure that you're putting your employees first and making sure their needs are met. And so I'll say that the trends are similar across the world and across organization size and different demographic variables like that. But the way that they're manifest is very different.
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So I want to move now to the role of leaders and impact on resilience of organizations. We talked a lot about how adaptability is a big driver and predictor of the ability to be resilient in an organization. Would you recommend that organizations into the future, and particularly now, find agile leaders to take the organization into the future? There's a lot of conversation out in the industry about high potential leaders and how do you find them and develop them. But what about agile leaders? What's their role for the future?
I think one of the biggest challenges here is at the same time when leaders are dealing with the changes in the business and the pretty dramatic and all the organization changes that are going on, and how do you deal with those, and what do people need to stay safe, that you also puts a huge premium on leaders that are not only able to figure out how to get things done in this environment, but how to use their own behavior as a model for how you can operate effectively. I think one of the biggest challenges that leaders face in this environment really, really challenged because if everybody waits for someone else to communicate with them, we lose the capability to coordinate, and the kind of face-to-face interaction that you have is not something you can rely on. I was just looking at a great video of my friend and colleague from IMD, Michael Watkins, probably best known for being the author of The First 90 Days, and really interesting, because he said, show up, show your face, turn on the webcam. And he had an interesting term for leaders or individuals that, don't show up, and said, well, that's lurking. You see the boss's name on one of the Zoom boxes, but you don't see their reaction. You don't see their presence. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest opportunities. leaders that can present an informal, interactive, more networked approach to keep people in touch and to be accessible, those are the ones that I think are going to rise to the top. And I think it is a new skill set. It puts a real premium on just thinking, okay, we need to figure out how to work as effectively as we possibly can in a virtual environment and build our business around what's possible. So taking the lead, moving, that's one of the things that I think is so much different, is if you don't take the initiative to communicate, you're probably not well enough tuned in to learn very much. If you're not an exemplar of hearing people's voices, as our results showed pretty clearly, there'll be a limit to what you can accomplish. I don't know, Michael, you probably have a lot to add to that too.
Yeah, no, I would just say I think the model is helpful to think about this type of a question, because it's not really, what type of leader do we need? It's a leader that excels in many different competencies. Like Dan said, if you have a really agile leader who can't communicate well and doesn't bring employees with him or her, and it's going to be very difficult for that leader to succeed and for that leader to contribute a lot to the organization. And so it's about having strong adaptability while at the same time involving your employees, having a strong mission and clear objectives with your employees, and being consistent and having those strong core values. And so it's really about that full profile as much as possible. And this time it might be, adaptability is certainly something that is more important than ever as the world changes at a quicker pace than ever. But you can't look for adaptability and agility and at the expense of other areas.
Yeah, and I also think that, it's hard to be inclusive if you don't show up, if you don't listen. A focus on diversity and on equity means a lot of listening in an environment where it's harder to do that, not easier. And it all begins when a leader shows up, listens, and is open and uncomfortably vulnerable to all the changes that are going on, because that's really the only way that you can lead in this environment. So we are almost at the top of the hour. Anything else from the Q&A side, Zach, that we should spend a minute?
Oh, there was plenty, and I'll just say we'll be sure to follow up with folks if we didn't get to your questions today. We'll download them and reach back out.
Great.
Yeah, I think a really critical question that I think we can take a stab at an answer quickly is how does the lack of an employee being heard, right? We saw that as a theme. How does that impact an employee's loyalty and commitment to an organization? And what's a lesson that we can take from this?
Fundamental. When you don't hear someone anymore, they're probably gone. They're in an environment where, my God, this week we're almost up to 50 million people that have filed unemployment benefits. The challenge will come as we start to rebuild in this era, and there is more job demand. And, I think if you're not listening, you're going to lose them. And you're not going to lose the ones you don't want. You're going to lose the ones that you do want. So I think it's a very, very challenging, difficult, and both from a, kind of moral perspective and to just, survive and continue to be responsive. We've got to have our ears open, and they have to be visible and accessible. Management by walking around, can't walk around anymore. Well, what's the digital equivalent of walking around? We need to invent that, because if leaders aren't available and listening, then they're not going to hear what they need to know in order to manage effectively.
Yep. And to follow up with that, I think listening is step one, and, you know, acting and responding to that listening is step two, because without that, it's almost more detrimental to an employee who put their voice forward and took a risk by speaking up, but the organization and leaders didn't do anything about it. And so that's the step two that's necessary for the listening to be effective and to drive that engagement.
Great. Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour here, so we should probably wrap things up. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We will respond to the questions that you raised, even though we weren't able to address all of them in the discussion today. And we will keep you posted on all the work that we're doing, because we learn from you and we learn from what you do. And so to us, this is very much a partnership that we need to build in order to make it through this difficult time. So stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch. And we will too.
You'll be hearing from us via email, via social media on LinkedIn, and you'll join us for our next webinar in the coming weeks and months. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.